The woman at the counter didn't whisper it. She let the words drop between them like a verdict. There's no way this ticket is yours. Her laugh was small, sharp, practiced, the kind that draws curious eyes from strangers who suddenly feel permitted to judge. And in that moment, under the harsh glow of the departure board, a black teenager barely old enough to rent a car stood completely still, holding a first-class ticket she refused to believe he'd earned. Something flickered across his face. Not fear, not anger, but recognition. He'd seen this play before. And today, he wasn't walking off the stage. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main character. He didn't blink as the flight attendant rolled her eyes and waved over another agent, her voice growing louder, bolder, as if volume could turn bias into fact. Kids like you don't fly first class, she said, and the man behind him chuckled under his breath. The teenager stood rooted, shoulders squared, not saying a word. Silence can look like weakness until you realize it's restraint. She snatched the ticket from his hand, holding it between two fingers like something contaminated. Fake, she declared. Obvious. A few passengers nodded along without knowing why. That's how prejudice works. Quiet, contagious, casual. But then her confidence faltered. Because when she glanced back at the ticket, at the name printed there in clean black letters, something shifted in her expression. Surprise. Confusion. A tremor of dread. She didn't know it yet. Not fully. But she had just laughed in the face of the airline owner's only son. And the cost of that mistake was already boarding. The flight attendant tightened her stance as if the teenager's calm was somehow an inconvenience she had to eliminate. Her fingers pressed into the countertop, knuckles whitening, while the overhead speakers announced boarding for a different flight that no one in this corner of the terminal cared about anymore. Eyes tracked him from behind rolling suitcases and half-zipped backpacks. People watched the way they always do when they think they are witnessing a troublemaker being put in his place. Security is on the way, she said, her voice rising with the confidence of someone who believed she would be backed no matter how wrong she was. The second agent stepped closer, arms crossed, posture widening, anchoring himself like a barrier between the teenager and the truth. You can hand over whatever fake identification you printed, he added, or wait until security escorts you out. The teenager did not move. He simply blinked once, slow and deliberate, the way someone older might blink when they have endured this kind of scene more times than they can count. The fluorescent lights above flickered. He remembered a different airport years earlier, being 12 years old and pulled aside for a random screening that somehow never seemed random. He remembered the cold table, the empty hallway, the unspoken message that some kids were born suspicious. The present snapped back around him as the flight attendant slammed his ticket onto the counter, crumpling it slightly as she planted one hand firmly on top. I am not repeating myself, she said. You are not flying first class. Stand aside. A passenger nearby, an older man with a laptop bag, muttered. Happens all the time. They try anything these days. The teenager heard it. He just did not respond. A younger employee hovering behind the desk glanced at the scene, her badge turned backward, her voice barely a whisper. I scanned his ticket earlier, she said. It cleared. I saw it. The second agent snapped his fingers sharply. You. Do not get involved. But the teenager looked at her, just for a second, acknowledging her courage. She lowered her gaze as if apologizing for not being braver. Then the flight attendant leaned forward, close enough that her perfume cut through the recycled airport air. You want to try this little act somewhere else? She asked. Because it is not working here. He finally exhaled and reached slowly for his phone. Not fast, not defensive, not afraid. Just a controlled, quiet movement that made the agents exchange glances because quiet confidence is sometimes more threatening than raised voices. He lifted the phone to his ear. Father, he said, I am still at the counter. A pause. Yes, it happened again. The reaction was immediate. Not from him, but from the employee with the backward badge who visibly stiffened. She had heard that surname before. The second agent scoffed. You can call whoever you want. You are not boarding this plane. But then the flight attendant's voice cracked for the first time when she asked, "Who did you say you were calling?" He did not answer her. He did not need to. Because 3 gates away, a manager's radio buzzed with a short directive. 2 words spoken with the weight of ownership behind them. "Find him." Back at the counter, the teenager lowered the phone and spoke so softly the flight attendant had to lean in to hear him. "You really should have read the name on that ticket." She flipped it over again, the same ticket she had dismissed, mocked, and crumpled. Her eyes traced the letters this time, and her face changed. The color drained. Her lips parted. Her breath caught in her throat, because suddenly she realized exactly whom she had humiliated. And suddenly she understood why the terminal around her felt like it was about to shift under her feet. The owner's son was no longer silent, and the consequences were already moving through the airport like a storm with a destination. The flight attendant's breath trembled as she stared at the name she had ignored, mocked, and practically crushed under her palm. Around her, the terminal noise thinned into a brittle hush, the kind that forms when a room realizes it has misjudged the wrong person. The teenager did not move. He held the same posture he had held from the beginning, steady, reserved, almost too calm for someone moments away from being escorted out. And that calmness unsettled her more than any raised voice could have. "Sir, there seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes. The second agent stepped up beside her, but his voice lacked the certainty it had minutes earlier. "Let us verify your information again." The teenager simply replied, "You already did." At that exact moment, the manager who had received the urgent radio message appeared at the end of the counter, weaving through rolling luggage with a speed that suggested he already regretted not being here sooner. His eyes scanned the teenager first, then the crumpled ticket, then the trembling flight attendant. "Where is it?" he demanded. She swallowed. "Where is what?" He snatched the ticket from her hand, smoothing the crease with a palm that trembled slightly. Then he read the name. Fully, clearly, this time without assumption. His face drained of color. "Everyone step back," he said quietly, almost reverently. The second agent frowned. "Sir, he was trying to board with a fake ticket." "No," the manager answered. "He was trying to board with one of the most verified names in our entire system." He turned to the teenager. "I apologize for the delay, sir. Your father has been notified. He is on the line with the director of airport operations." The flight attendant's voice cracked. You know him?" The manager did not look at her. "Everyone knows him." She shook her head, unable to accept the reality forming around her. He did not say who he was. The teenager met her gaze then, not with anger, but with an exhaustion deeper than she had the imagination to understand. "I should not have to," he said. The words landed heavier than anything else spoken that day. The younger employee with the backward badge stepped forward again, this time with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "I tried to say something," she whispered. The manager acknowledged her with a nod. "And you were the only one who did the right thing." Her throat tightened, but she stood taller. The second agent attempted to salvage what dignity he had left. "Sir, if there was confusion, we can resolve it privately." But the teenager shook his head. "You created the scene publicly." The manager exhaled, understanding exactly what that meant. He motioned to the attendant and the agent. "Hand over your access badges." She froze. "Wait. This is a misunderstanding. I did not know. I was following protocol." "Protocol," the teenager repeated softly, "does not teach you to laugh." Her face collapsed. Around them, passengers who had been pretending not to watch were now fully invested. A woman with a stroller pulled her phone lower, no longer recording, simply stunned. A businessman lowered his briefcase slowly to the floor. And from the far end of the counter, a deep voice cut through the tension like a closing gate. "Is that my son?" Every head turned. Walking toward them was a tall man in a tailored coat, stride unwavering, authority radiating off him like heat. The owner himself. The flight attendant took one step back, then another, as if distance could undo what she had already done. The teenager remained still, but his shoulders dropped in a familiar relief. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "I heard everything," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "Every word." He turned to the staff. "And now we will discuss the price of speaking to my child as if he did not belong in a space I built." The terminal felt impossibly small. The consequences had arrived, and they looked nothing like the punishment she had expected to deliver just minutes ago. The owner's footsteps slowed as he reached the counter. and the air around them tightened as if the entire terminal were leaning in to listen. He kept one hand on his son's shoulder, grounding him with a steady presence, then lifted his gaze toward the staff who had just minutes earlier spoken to the teenager like he was an inconvenience to be removed. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said, his voice low enough to be controlled but loud enough to leave no possibility of misunderstanding. The manager stepped forward first, words tumbling out as he explained the ticket, the refusal to verify it properly, the accusations, the tone, and the mockery. He pointed briefly toward the younger employee who had tried to speak up. The owner nodded at her, then turned back to the flight attendant. "You," he said. She flinched. "I want to hear from you." She opened her mouth, but nothing coherent came out. Her throat seized on excuses that no longer had weight. "Sir, I thought he was—" "Not one time did you check his name," the owner said. "Not one time did you follow your own verification process. You judged him before you ever read the information right in front of you." Her lips trembled. "I did not know who he was." "That is the problem," the owner said, his tone colder now. "You only treat people with respect when you believe they are somebody important." The second agent stiffened, trying to preserve whatever was left of his posture. "Sir, we were only trying to prevent fraud. We get many cases like that. It is procedure." "Procedure does not include laughing in a passenger's face," the owner replied. "Procedure does not include calling security before checking your own system. Procedure does not include humiliating a minor." Murmurs rippled through the terminal. A mother holding her toddler shook her head with disbelief. A businessman removed his glasses to get a clearer look. The travelers who had dismissed the scene earlier now watched with a quiet shame, recognizing their own part in the assumptions that had been made. The younger employee with the backward badge lifted her chin. "Sir, he scanned properly." They ignored it. The owner looked at her. "You did the right thing. Thank you." Her eyes glossed with relief. The flight attendant took a step forward, desperation creeping into her voice. "Sir, please, I made a mistake. I was stressed. The line was long. I did not mean—" "Intent is not the standard here. Impact is," he said. "And the impact was that you decided my son did not belong in the very airline he will one day inherit." That sentence struck her like a blow. Several passengers gasped. A man whispered to his wife, "He is the heir." The second agent's voice faltered. "Sir, we can correct this. We can make it right." "You cannot correct what you refuse to acknowledge," the owner responded. Then he turned slightly, speaking into his phone. "Carla, activate internal review at this terminal. Begin recording. I want audio and visual logs preserved. Flag staff credentials for immediate suspension pending investigation." The flight attendant's breath hitched as her badge blinked red. The second agent's did too, a soft chime signaling revoked access. "Sir, please," she repeated. "Do not do this here." "You did it here," the owner said. The travelers who once stood in silent judgment now watched with a very different intensity. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the truth laid bare. The teenager shifted slightly, but his father rested a hand on his shoulder again. "You do not need to say a word," he murmured. "You have said enough by standing still." The manager turned to the owner. "Sir, would you like to move to a private area?" "No," he answered. "This happened publicly. The lesson stays public." The flight attendant's voice cracked into a whisper. "I did not know he was your son." The owner looked at her one last time. "If you had known, you would have treated him differently. That is the entire issue." Silence fell heavy, the kind that carries consequence. And as the owner signaled for the director of operations to approach, the staff who had mocked a teenager only minutes before understood that the storm they had summoned was no longer avoidable. It had arrived, and it was not leaving quietly. The director of airport operations arrived with a pace that carried both urgency and dread, his identification badge swinging against his chest as he crossed the terminal floor. Travelers instinctively stepped aside, sensing the gravity of the moment. He joined the owner at the counter, his posture straightening as he took in the tense scene. Two suspended employees pale and trembling, a manager standing rigid with remorse, a young staff member clutching her hands together in anxious courage, and the teenager at the center of it all, still calm, still composed, still quietly absorbing every second of what had unfolded. "Sir," the director said, addressing the owner with a respectful nod, "the incident log has been activated. I have instructed security teams to preserve all audio and camera footage in this zone." The owner nodded once. Good. Nothing about this moment will be lost or rewritten. The flight attendant swayed slightly, her breathing uneven. Sir, I truly did not mean to. Stop, the owner said, not unkindly but firmly enough to close her mouth instantly. You meant every assumption you made. You meant the tone you used. You meant the laughter you thought nobody would challenge. Her eyes watered. The second agent rubbed a hand over his jaw, looking as though his legs might buckle beneath the weight of what he had pretended was procedure. We should have taken his ticket seriously, he said, voice low. But we see a lot of attempted upgrades. We see people trying to lie their way into premium seats. We make judgment calls. The owner turned his head toward him slowly. Judgment without verification is not a call. It is prejudice. A soft gasp came from a nearby passenger. A woman with a travel blanket clutched it tighter, as if squeezing out her own discomfort at hearing the truth so plainly spoken. The younger employee stepped forward again. Her voice was steadier this time, but her hands still trembled. I told them the ticket was real, she said. I told them I scanned it. They ignored me. The director acknowledged her with a nod. I will personally file your statement, and you will be protected from retaliation. She blinked rapidly, stunned by the support she had not expected to receive. The flight attendant pressed her palm to her mouth as if trying to keep her panic contained. Sir, I can make this right. I can apologize. I can learn. Please do not end my career over a misunderstanding. The owner's expression did not soften. Your career is not ending because of a misunderstanding. It is ending because of a pattern people like my son know too well. The teenager shifted slightly, and his father glanced down at him before speaking again. How many kids have you spoken to like he was invisible? How many passengers have you brushed aside because they did not look expensive enough? How many warnings have you ignored from your own colleague? She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The questions echoed through the terminal like accusations soaked in truth. The director looked to the owner. Sir, would you like us to escort them to the operations office for processing? Not yet, the owner said. Then he turned to the teenager. Do you want to say anything before this moves forward? For the first time since the confrontation began, the teenager looked directly at the flight attendant. His voice was quiet but painfully clear. I did everything right. I followed every rule. I handed you my ticket, my identification, and my patience. And none of it mattered because you saw me as a problem before you saw me as a passenger. Her tears finally fell. The teenager continued, still composed. If you had read the name on the ticket first, you would have welcomed me. But you saw my face first. And that decided everything for you. No one in the terminal breathed. The owner placed a hand on his son's back, steady and proud. That is why this ends today, he said. He turned to the director. Process their suspensions and escort them to the operations office. Their employment is terminated pending final review. The flight attendant let out a small, broken sound as her badge blinked red again. The second agent bowed his head in defeat. The manager looked away, ashamed. As security approached, the owner gave one final look at the staff who had stood in judgment. You treated my son like he did not belong. But he belongs here more than any of you ever will. And with that, the collapse was complete. The terminal that had once been a stage for humiliation now stood as the place where silence finally broke and justice began to speak. Security escorted the suspended employees toward the operations office, but the terminal did not return to normal. It could not. The tension that had built over the past 15 minutes had settled into something heavier, something unmistakably public. Conversations died mid-sentence. Boarding announcements faded into background noise. Everyone who had witnessed the humiliation, the resistance, and the reveal now watched the aftermath with a mixture of remorse and awakening. The owner remained at the counter with his son, the director of airport operations standing beside them like a sentinel waiting for further instruction. The young employee with the backward badge lingered a few steps away, unsure if she should leave or stay. The owner turned to her. What is your name? He asked. Emily, she answered softly. Emily, he repeated, nodding. You did what the others refused to do. You spoke up even when you were dismissed. That matters. She swallowed hard. I did not do enough. You did more than most adults here, the owner said. Emily exhaled shakily, absorbing the validation she had never expected to receive. Meanwhile, a few passengers approached hesitantly, unsure whether they should speak. One woman finally stepped forward, clutching her boarding pass against her chest. Sir, she said, I want you to know that I saw everything. I am so sorry your son went through that. The owner nodded with a calm, measured grace. Thank you. But this is not the first time something like this has happened to him, or to others who look like him. Her eyes lowered with shame. You are right, she said. And too many of us stay quiet when we know it is wrong. A businessman behind her added, I should have said something earlier. I recognized the tone. I have seen that kind of thing happen before. The owner did not scold them. His voice held no bitterness, only truth. Silence is how this behavior survives. Today, no one was silent. At that moment, a security supervisor arrived, saluting the director. Sir, the staff in question have been escorted without incident. Their credentials have been collected. The director turned to the owner. Would you like to continue the review in a private conference room? Not yet, the owner said. Then he looked down at his son. The way they treated you is unacceptable, but I want you to see something important. The teenager lifted his gaze, waiting. The owner gestured subtly toward the passengers surrounding them, the witnesses who now stood not just watching but supporting. Look around, he said. You were not alone. People spoke up. People stepped forward. That is something worth seeing. The teenager nodded slowly, understanding the lesson woven into the moment. The owner then faced the director again. Before we proceed anywhere else, I want the full preliminary findings here at this counter. The director hesitated for a second, then signaled to a junior operations analyst who hurried over with a tablet. Sir, we reviewed the staff activity logs, the analyst began, and the flight attendant who mocked your son has 3 prior bias-related complaints on record, all dismissed at the supervisory level. The terminal seemed to inhale sharply. The owner's jaw tightened. And the agent? 2 similar complaints, the analyst said. Also dismissed. The manager shifted uncomfortably, guilt rippling through his expression. Those reports came through me, he admitted. I should have pushed them forward. I failed in that responsibility. The owner's eyes fixed on him, not with anger, but with a steady burden of truth. A leader does not just manage people. A leader protects them. The manager lowered his head. I understand that now. The owner continued. Those passengers who filed complaints deserve justice. My son deserved better. And so will every traveler who comes through here after today. Emily blinked back emotion, realizing how close she had come to being ignored like the others before her. The director straightened his shoulders. What are your next instructions, sir? The owner placed a hand on the counter, his voice unwavering. Initiate a full sweep of training practices at this terminal. Every complaint that was buried will be reopened. Every staff member will undergo recertification. And from this moment forward, no one in this building will decide who belongs based on their own assumptions. The director nodded decisively. It will be done. The owner then looked at his son, his voice gentler now. We are not here to punish. We are here to change. And for the first time that day, the teenager finally allowed his shoulders to relax. Because this was no longer just a confrontation. This was the beginning of accountability. The director of airport operations stepped away to begin implementing the owner's directives, but the echo of his departing footsteps did not dissolve the tension that still held the terminal in its grip. Travelers remained where they were, not out of fear or curiosity, but out of a growing sense that something larger than a customer service dispute was unfolding in front of them. The owner kept his hand on his son's back, grounding him, while Emily stood nearby, unsure whether she should stay or give them space. She did not move until the owner looked at her again. Emily, he said, you will stay involved in this process. You saw the truth before anyone else dared to acknowledge it. Emily nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. The manager stepped forward cautiously, the weight of his earlier failure pressing visibly on his features. Sir, he said, the staff who mishandled your son's ticket are being processed now. I take responsibility for not escalating their previous complaints. The owner studied him with a gaze steady enough to level excuses, but measured enough to allow accountability. Responsibility is not a statement. It is an action. What do you intend to do differently? The manager exhaled, the answer bubbling up with genuine remorse. I will no longer treat complaints as paperwork. I will treat them as warnings. I will retrain every supervisor under me and document every incident thoroughly. No dismissal. No shortcuts. The owner nodded. Then you may stay. But understand that this is your last chance to lead with integrity, not convenience. The manager bowed his head. I will not fail again. Behind them, A middle-aged woman approached hesitantly, her suitcase rolling unevenly behind her. "Sir," she said, addressing the owner, "I just want to say this should never have happened. Your son handled himself with more dignity than half the adults in this building." The teenager glanced at her, surprised by the kindness. "Thank you," he replied quietly. Nearby, a father carrying a toddler on his hip spoke up. "People do not realize how much these moments stay with kids," he said. "I saw it happen to my nephew. He still talks about it." The owner's expression shifted gently, acknowledging the truth of the stranger's words. "That is exactly why this cannot continue." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Their silence earlier had felt complicit. Now their voices felt like witnesses stepping into the light. Just then, a regional operations executive arrived, breathless from having rushed across the terminal. "Sir," he said, addressing the owner with a respectful urgency, "I have been briefed. We have grounds to initiate a full regional audit of staff behavior and complaint handling procedures. All findings will funnel directly to your office." The owner nodded. "Begin it immediately." The executive turned to the teenager. "I want you to know that what happened today is not reflective of our company's values. This will lead to change." The teenager did not respond with anger or gratitude. He responded with truth. "It is reflective of some people's values," he said, "and those are the ones that need to change." The executive's expression tightened with humility. "You are absolutely right." The owner placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "You spoke the truth without raising your voice. That is strength." Then he turned to the executive. "I want the names of every passenger who filed similar complaints and never received a response." "We are retrieving those now," the executive said. "They will be contacted personally for follow-up." Emily blinked, stunned. "Sir, you are really doing all this? For one incident?" The owner looked at her, his voice calm but resonant. "It was not one incident. It was one moment revealing many." The teenager exhaled, the words cutting through the tension like sunlight through cloud. "People should not have to be somebody important to be treated like somebody." The owner nodded with quiet pride. "Exactly." The regional executive stepped aside, tapping urgently on his tablet. The owner turned back to his son. "Are you ready to board?" The teenager nodded. But as they began to move toward the gate, the owner paused and looked back at the terminal, at the staff who had watched silently, at the travelers holding their breath, at the shift in atmosphere that felt deeper than inconvenience and heavier than embarrassment. "Remember this," he said to no one in particular, but to everyone at once. "Respect is not a privilege to be earned. It is the baseline for every human being who walks into this building." And with that, the turning point became irreversible. The storm that began with a laugh was now becoming a change that would not be forgotten. The walk toward the departure gate felt less like a routine transition, and more like the slow release of a tension that had wrapped itself around the entire terminal. Passengers who had watched silently before now stepped aside with a quiet reverence, as if acknowledging that something significant had unfolded in this space, something they were still processing. The owner and his son moved together, but before they reached the gate agent, a familiar voice echoed down the concourse. "Sir, please, may I speak with you?" It was the flight attendant who had mocked the teenager only minutes earlier. She was no longer in uniform. Her badge had been confiscated, and the absence of it left her looking smaller, stripped of the authority she had misused. Security flanked her at a respectful distance, not restraining her, but clearly ensuring she did not cause another disruption. The owner paused, his son stopping beside him. He did not turn fully, only enough to see her in his periphery. "This is not the time," he said. But she pressed a hand to her chest, desperation etched across every line of her face. "I need you to know I am sorry," she said. "Not because of who he is, but because I understand now what I did. I judged him before I knew anything about him. I judged him because," her voice cracked, the truth trying to push its way forward, "because of how he looked. And I was wrong." The teenager looked at her, not with bitterness but with a quiet weight that made her tears fall faster. The owner finally turned toward her, fully this time. "An apology may be sincere," he said, "but it does not erase the harm or the pattern behind it." She nodded quickly. I know it does not fix anything. I wanted him to hear me." The teenager met her eyes and spoke with the same steady calm he had held throughout the entire ordeal. "I heard you the first time when you laughed," he said. The attendant's knees softened as if the words alone carried physical force. He continued, "But I hear you now too. And I hope you are honest with yourself about why this happened." She covered her mouth with her hand, the reality settling over her like a weight she could not shake. Security stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her arm. They did not drag her away. They simply guided her backward, making it clear her involvement here was finished. As she was escorted toward the operations office, the owner turned once more to his son. "You handled that with more grace than many grown adults could have," he said. The teenager did not smile. "I just said the truth." The director of operations rejoined them, tablet in hand. "Sir, the audit teams have already reached out to regional leadership. Every complaint linked to this terminal in the past 18 months will be reopened. Some have clear patterns of profiling." The owner's expression hardened slightly, not with anger, but with determination. "Good. I want every passenger who was ignored to receive a direct follow-up. This is not about one incident. This is about a culture that has gone unchallenged for too long." Emily approached carefully. "Sir, will the public know what happened here today?" The owner answered without hesitation. "They already do. People filmed it. It will circulate whether we want it to or not. But what they see from us next must be accountability, not excuses." The teenager looked around at the faces gathered near the gate. Some were empathetic, some ashamed, some awakened in ways they did not yet know how to articulate. "Do you think this will make things different?" he asked quietly. The owner placed a hand on his shoulder. "This will not change the world overnight," he said. "But it may change the people who were standing here today. And sometimes, that is where real change begins." Just then, the gate agent approached, her voice steady and respectful. "Sir, your seats are ready. You may board when you are ready." The owner thanked her, then looked at his son. "Are you ready?" The teenager nodded. As they approached the jet bridge, the owner turned back one final time, addressing the director and anyone within earshot. "The standard changes today," he said, "and it will never return to what it was." With those words, they stepped forward, leaving behind a terminal forever altered by a moment in which silence broke, truth rose, and a lesson echoed far beyond the walls where it was spoken. When the owner and his son stepped through the jet bridge, the terminal behind them did not return to the hum of ordinary travel. Instead, it carried the echo of a moment that had drawn a line across the floor, dividing what had been tolerated from what would never be tolerated again. The gate agent closed the door quietly, her expression still carrying the weight of everything she had witnessed. The owner paused just inside the cabin entrance, placing a hand on the wall as if anchoring himself before moving forward. The flight crew straightened instantly, recognizing him not from vanity or rumor, but because every senior staff member in the airline had seen him during leadership reviews and safety audits. "Welcome aboard, sir," the lead attendant said carefully. Her voice held no fear, only sincere respect. The owner nodded and motioned for his son to precede him down the aisle. The teenager walked slowly, aware of the eyes that lifted from screens and newspapers, curious about the dignified man following him. But today was not about spectacle. It was about truth. They reached their seats, and as the teenager settled in, the weight of the morning finally eased from his shoulders. He exhaled a breath he had been holding for far too long. "It is over, right?" he asked quietly. His father lowered himself into the seat beside him. "No," he said, "but this part is. What comes next is what matters." The teenager nodded, understanding that the consequence had already set things in motion beyond their sight. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Emily stood with the director and the regional executive as they discussed next steps. She listened as they mapped out new reporting protocols and verified which cases would be reopened first. For the first time since she started working at the airport, she felt like she was standing on the right side of something real. "I want daily updates," the director said, "and I want staff retraining scheduled immediately." Emily glanced toward the jet bridge door, knowing she would remember this day for the rest of her life. On the aircraft, the engines rumbled to life. The hum settled into a steady vibration beneath their feet as the plane pushed back from the gate. The owner rested his head briefly against the seat, eyes closed, not from fatigue, but from reflection. "You taught them something today," he said softly. The teenager frowned slightly. "I did not do anything except stand there." His father smiled in that quiet, knowing way reserved for lessons he had learned the hard way long before his son was born. Sometimes standing still, is the loudest truth in the room, he said. People saw how they treated you while you followed every rule. They saw how quickly they made assumptions. That makes it harder for them to pretend it does not happen. The teenager looked out the window, watching ground crew traffic move with practiced coordination on the tarmac. Do you think anything will really change? He asked. Yes, his father said simply. Because this time, there are witnesses. This time, people spoke up. And this time, the consequence reached the very top. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the pilot made an announcement, thanking passengers for their patience. The words were routine, but they carried a different tone, as if even he had sensed the shift in the air. The teenager leaned back, letting the vibrations of the aircraft settle him. He felt something unfamiliar, something he had not felt during the confrontation. Not anger, not triumph, something steadier. He felt seen. The aircraft lifted off, the city falling away beneath them as the clouds pressed closer. Far below, the terminal returned to motion, but its people were changed by what they had seen. The suspended employees faced accountability, the leaders launched sweeping reform, and the young staff member who had spoken up discovered the strength of her own voice. In the quiet cabin high above the ground, the owner placed a hand on his son's arm. Remember this, he said. Respect is not measured by who you are. It is measured by how you treat those you do not know. The teenager nodded, holding the words like a compass meant to guide him long after this flight was over. And as the plane ascended into open sky, leaving the terminal far behind, one truth settled over everything that had happened. The world does not change in silence. It changes when someone refuses to let disrespect be the final word. Today, that someone had been a teenager who refused to bow his head. And from this day forward, things would not return to the way they were.